Hello everyone, welcome to our channel and welcome to this class on the liver flush and why you really need to do one. Our ministry is called Closure for Jesus. My name is Dana Gesellchen and I, along with my husband Kalen Gesellchen, operate this ministry. We are medical missionaries and we work at this juncture on a donation basis only. So if you would like to support our work, follow the link in the description for our PayPal account, or you can go to closureforjesus@yahoo.com and contact us. We appreciate your support and it allows us to help those who are not able to support our work. With that behind, I also have to give a disclaimer, and you can see that in this slide here, that this is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or anything like that. You can see that in this particular slide, and so I have to put that out there for the FDA's sake and for my sake as well. So this is lesson 1, and the title of lesson 1 is Your Liver Needs Love. Now I have another video on YouTube called Love Your Liver, and I encourage you to go and watch that. I give some information in that particular video that I probably won't cover in this video or in this class. So if you have time, jump over to our YouTube channel, which is under my name, Dana Gesellchen, and you can watch that. So there's several key points that I would like to discuss, and you can see that on this particular slide, that I would like to encourage everyone to do, and that is, I am a firm believer in diagnostics. So if you can work with your healthcare provider, ask them if you can get some lab tests done. Here we can discuss some of those lab tests that I think are very important that everyone should have done, especially the vitamin D level. I think it's 25 hydroxy D level that you can ask your doctor to do. Most people are deficient in vitamin D, particularly those who live in the more northern climates. I'm in North Dakota right now recording this, and I could pretty well guarantee that most of the people up here don't have enough unless they're supplementing. My husband, when we first had his levels tested, we had already moved down south, and his levels were, I think, in the single digits, if I remember correctly, and it took us a lot of effort to get his vitamin D level up. And we actually were not able to get his vitamin D level up until we got his magnesium level up. We can talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. We also need to focus on omega-3 fatty acids in our diet. Sources of that are organic, of course, flaxseed, chia seed, these types of foods, walnuts. People who are not vegetarian, as I am, may use fish oils and things like that, but I consider those fairly contaminated because the oceans are very contaminated these days. You also want to consider, as I mentioned already, magnesium intake as well as vitamin C intake. We'll talk about vitamin C and magnesium throughout this talk here and there, and vitamin D as well. Another thing to consider having tested is your ANA, anti-nuclear antibody. Many people these days are suffering with GI symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms, and that is coming from our environment largely, not just the environment around us, but the environment of what we eat, what we put into our bodies, the toxins that we're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. These things have caused an explosion in autoimmune disease, and if you have this test done, it's a blood test, an ANA, and it is positive, then that means that you have some form of autoimmune disease. So I really encourage people to have this test done because I believe that there is an explosion of autoimmune disease among us right now. So I would test for that. I would also test for vitamin B12 levels. Now, there are other tests that I would recommend people get just to kind of see where you're at as a baseline. Complete blood count, metabolic profile, hemoglobin A1C, a CRP, C-reactive protein. All of these tests are going to kind of give you an idea of how much inflammation is in your body and, you know, what direction you need to take. But for whatever is going on with you, after our discussion in this particular class, I think you will see the necessity of addressing liver health. So let's move forward. The bile duct system in the liver is like the infrastructure for a city. It's the highway system that delivers nutrition, that delivers vitamins and minerals and takes away the trash. That's this bile duct system in the body. And it's particularly for removing waste from the body. So let's dive into this a little bit more deeply. Think about a big city. If for some reason let's say, I think we've seen this like in New York City when the waste management workers go on strike, how the garbage piles up, and you can see a thought of that here in this picture on this slide. There's trouble if the garbage is not taken out. So we need to make sure that we are taking out the garbage from our body, and that largely is the bile duct system. Not to mention the other avenues of elimination, such as the bowels, the kidneys, the lungs, the skin. All these things are avenues of elimination. But the one that I think is most neglected is the bile duct system. And that's why I'm focusing more on that in this particular class. So let's move ahead. A blockage of healthy movement of bile can lead to a buildup of toxins in the body, and especially an overabundance of estrogens and estrogen dominance. And many of, particularly the breast cancers that are predominant in today's society among women, is from estrogen dominance. Many ladies have a breast cancer that's caused from this. My best friend died in 2009 from breast cancer that had spread to the liver, and I guess that was really the trajectory that the impetus that gave me that trajectory in my studies, was the loss of my best friend. And I determined then and there when she died that that would not happen again to another of my friends if I could help it. So we need to really understand the importance of this particular aspect of health. The liver normally produces about a quart or a quart and a half of bile daily, and when bile flow is insufficient, fat absorption is incomplete. And that's very important, as we'll discuss in a little bit when we discuss fat-soluble vitamins. So store that away in your mind. When you have insufficient absorption of fat, this can also cause the stool to float. So if your stool is floating, there is an issue with fat absorption and your bile flow. If your fat absorption is incomplete, then you're also not absorbing your calcium properly. So the body takes calcium from the bones because that blood level has to be maintained. And when the body pulls the calcium from the bones, what does that cause? It causes a risk for osteoporosis. So you can see how the hip bone's connected to the thigh bone kind of thing. It's all interrelated. So we need to understand the physiology of how the body is working here. Bile is also necessary to digest proteins and carbohydrates. So if bile is insufficient, bacteria in the gut have to contribute to breaking down or to this part of the digestion. That can cause putrefaction, and it can lead to gas and bloating and all kinds of GI issues. That is very toxic when it sits in the gut like that. In this slide we can see that low bile flow is also one of the most common causes of constipation. So if you're constipated, it may simply be that your bile is thick and sludgy and not liquid and fluid and flowing smoothly. When bile flow is impeded, you may notice that the stool is more pale in color, and that is due to the lack of bilirubin and biliverdin. I believe we discussed those a little bit more as we go on in the talk as well. The liver filters more than a quart of blood per minute, and toxins in this blood are left toxins in this blood are left for the liver to deal with, and if there are stones in the biliary tree, that bile flow is going to be plugged up and those toxins are going to stay in the liver and not be removed, and that is going to recirculate them in your body, causing skin issues, fatigue, achy joints, all kinds of problems. All major diseases are preceded by an obstruction in bile flow from gallstones, whether they're intrahepatic stones, which, by the way, let me mention something here. If you've had an ultrasound of the abdomen and it shows maybe some stones in your gallbladder or some sludge in your gallbladder, but the liver looks normal, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are no intrahepatic stones, because the intrahepatic stones tend to be softer, and those don't show up on an ultrasound. So just bear that in mind. Just because you've had an ultrasound and it shows no stones does not mean they're not there. When stones are lodged in the biliary tree, it decreases blood flow to this region and it decreases bile flow from this region. So that section of the liver essentially then suffocates, and those dead cells are then replaced with fibrotic tissue, liver fibrosis. This is called a cirrhotic liver, and if this condition is not immediately addressed, it can lead to liver failure, and that of course can result in death. Symptoms of liver failure include, but are not limited to, fluid accumulation. I don't know if you've ever heard the term ascites, A-S-C-I-T-E-S. Ascites is when the liver is so clogged that the liquids cannot flow through it, and so basically water just builds up, toxic water, in the abdomen, and a person can look. This happened to my friend right before she died. Her abdomen swelled up like she was 6 or 7 months pregnant, and you could tap one side of her abdomen and you could see fluid waves, and then if you had your hand on the other side you could feel that fluid wave hit your other hand. So that's the fluid accumulation. She also had bleeding disorders. She began to throw up blood. She was passing blood in her stool, and this is because the liver regulates the clotting factors in the blood. Kidney failure, that's another thing that happened to my friend. Her kidneys shut down. Drop in blood sugar, tremors, confusion, infections, edema, coma, and in the worst case, of course, death. But the ability of the liver to recover is remarkable. In that Love Your Liver talk that I referred to earlier, I mentioned that 70, and some people say up to 80 and even 85% of the liver can be damaged or even destroyed, and you have no idea your liver is sick. Praise God, He made our livers with the capacity to be able to regenerate. In fact, when they do a liver transplant, they don't take a whole liver and put it into somebody. They put a part, and that grows. If part of your liver has to be removed, that part, it can regrow. So I praise God that He made our liver so resilient that it can recover like this. Fatty liver, let's talk about this just a minute. Fatty liver disease is caused by an accumulation of large amounts of triglyceride fats in the liver, and this again is also reversible. Alcohol consumption as well as excess fat and sugar, and that sugar is not just in the form of sugar like in soda pops or pastries and things like that. It's actually even in refined carbohydrates that turn into sugar in your body. Breads, pastas, donuts, pastries, pies, all these cookies, all these kinds of things turn into sugar inside the body. The consumption of these things can cause fatty liver as well as the use of certain drugs. In fact, I believe it's acetaminophen can lead to fatty liver. We'll talk about that a little bit. A healthy liver can move excess fat from the liver via the bile duct system. But again, if there's obstruction in these bile ducts, the body cannot perform that function. Fatty liver can also lead to diabetes and heart disease, strokes, as well as obesity. And let me just mention this here. as regards bile duct obstruction, I have a video on our channel called Breaking the Mold is the name of that video. If you go and watch that video, I share my experience of how I actually had parasites, yes, parasites, blocking my bile ducts so that my liver, my bile flow was impeded, and my liver actually swole. You could see there was a definite line and a swollen area under my rib cage where you could see my liver. Just go watch that video, and I share the, I'll try to remember to put a link for it in the description. And I had a lot of pain there. It was very tender. I could hardly touch that area. And I was praying and asking the Lord to tell me what was wrong with me. And so you can just go watch that video and see what happened there. But it was parasites. So unless this bile obstruction is addressed, it can lead to acute hepatitis, which is what happened with me. I had this acute hepatitis because the parasites were plugging up my bile flow so that my liver could not drain. That was very dangerous, and this is the reason why, from my personal experience, I recommend people to do a parasite detox before they start trying to detox the liver or deal with any kind of liver flush or anything. Further, gallstones that are in the liver, in the gallbladder, are intrahepatic stones. These can harbor viruses. And I have also read research that suggests that every one of those stones encapsulates a parasite. I find that very interesting, and I found quite a bit of evidence to support that. If the liver is unhealthy, it will be unable to deal with these gallstones and the viruses, and hepatitis can result from that. You can end up with a viral hepatitis. Hepatitis is just inflammation of the liver from some cause. Another danger from gallstones in the liver or intrahepatic stones is the back pressure on the system that can decrease bile production. And this can you can see how it's like if you take a water hose with the water running and you kink that hose to pinch off the flow of water, the hose proximal to that or back of that where you've kinked it, the hose is going to swell up, and eventually it may even rupture and have a leak if the pressure is high enough. And that happens in our bodies when our bile flow is obstructed. Everything back of that has more pressure on it, and this can lead, as we'll discuss in a little bit, to even things like hypertension. So let's move on. Toxins are stored in the bile, and particularly mold toxins, and I experienced this. This is what caused my issue that I discussed earlier. Mold toxins. I was exposed to mold, and if you don't know, mold and parasites, when your body is affected by mold toxins or any kind of acute toxicity like this, it gives parasites the opportunity to really get a foothold in the body. And it takes a long time to eradicate these things. They are tenacious. But there are ways around that. There are ways to deal with that, and we are going to discuss that in this class. So mold toxins are very hard on the liver. And if the exposure is severe, this can lead to this can mean more mold toxins in the bile than bile itself. And that is a bad thing. That happened to me, and I had to learn my way around that. And so we can discuss that more in this class. And if you have questions on that, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, or contact me at closureforjesus@yahoo.com. Our bodies use something called phosphatidylcholine to make clean bile, to dilute toxins, and to aid in detoxification. Now, there are foods that contain phosphatidylcholine. Most common sources that are known are animal-based, but I'm a vegan, a vegetarian, plant-based diet, and so sources for me are lecithin. I use sunflower lecithin, cruciferous vegetables, and nuts and seeds. Of course, I use organic. Cruciferous vegetables are vital for all stages of liver detoxification, and I discuss that in the Love Your Liver talk. So if you want to go again and watch that one, there's a lot of information there on that. So if you have thyroid issues and the doctor's told you don't eat cruciferous vegetables, if you lightly steam those, then you can consume those. Okay, gallstones can range in consistency from soft or gel-like, as I mentioned earlier. The intrahepatic stones tend to be more soft, or they can be very hard and more like, these are like the cholesterol stones. The softer stones, again, are not detected by ultrasound, but they can still obstruct the bile flow. And they can be as small as the pin of a head. I'll show you some pictures in just a few minutes. Or they can be as large as a golf ball. Now, I have never seen one as large as a golf ball, but I have personally passed several the size of the last digit of my thumb, which for me, I'm a small stature person. I think I'm like 5'1½". I barely weigh 100 pounds. That's a big stone for somebody my size. Here's a picture. The hard and larger stones need to be softened before they can be passed through the bile ducts, and we use malic acid for that. There are several ways you can obtain malic acid. You can obtain it in capsule form, or if you don't want to do that, you can juice green apples. The Granny Smith apples are very high. Malic acid is the substance in fruits that gives that really tart flavor. So we're thinking tart cherries, tart apples, these kinds of things are going to be very high in malic acid. So that's a really good source, and that will help to soften these stones. When we do a liver flush, we don't want those stones to get stuck in the bile ducts. So we always do something to help soften those stones for a time period before we do a liver flush. And malic acid is what we use for that purpose. Okay, intrahepatic stones are about 90% cholesterol and are typically, but not always, formed as a result of the consumption of animal products. And this is why I am a strong proponent of a whole foods, plant-based diet. I personally believe that that is what God created for us. If you go to your Bible, open to Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, you'll see why I believe that. Bile is alkaline, and denatured proteins, which come largely from animal products, cause it to clump, and this leads to stone formation. Alcohol consumption can also contribute to this. And women tend to make these stones as a result of alcohol consumption at a far greater rate than men do. So I don't know why that is, but it may be the estrogen that's in it that contributes to that, but I don't know. I've never read any research on that. Drug consumption, particularly acetaminophen, Tylenol, which we mentioned earlier, can lead to can cause the bile to coagulate, and this can lead to stone formation. Okay, anger is very interesting. Anger changes the gut flora and also the consistency of your bile, causing it to thicken. So if you're dealing with anger issues, and before I met Jesus, I had terrible anger issues. I did not have a short fuse. I had a detonator. And so it wasn't until after I met the Lord that I was able to control that anger and deal with that. I gave it to Him, and He was able to deal with that for me. The liver regulates the viscosity of the blood, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the blood clotting factors. Poor sleep habits can contribute to stone formation. This is because the liver is working at night. Let me mention something here too. There's something called autophagy. I talk about this again in that Love Your Liver talk. We should not eat late in the evening. Our last meal should be early enough so that, this is why I'm a proponent of the 2-meal plan. A big breakfast, a smaller lunch, and then if you eat anything for supper, it should be very light. Just a handful of grapes, an apple, a little bit of popcorn, something like that, so that it's easily digested and your stomach is empty when you go to bed. That way, your liver will not enter this autophagy phase unless all digestion is complete. This is the time when the liver does its house cleaning. And if we are constantly feeding, then the liver has no time to deal with the trash, to take it out. And so we need that time. We need to go to bed with an empty stomach so that the liver can do its job, the stomach can have time to rest. These are very delicate organs. We need to learn to take care of them. Poor sleep habits can also increase weight gain by 40%. Okay, that was an interesting statistic. Okay, here's some pictures. You can see in this slide, this is a picture of some of the soft stones that are lodged in a dissected liver. And you can see there, these are the dark green stones here where the arrows are pointing. And look at this slide. You can see the little close-up of a stone, an intrahepatic stone, and you can see that everything back of that stone dilates and it's congested, and eventually, if that is not taken care of, that portion of the liver will become very sick and can die. And again, those dead liver cells will be replaced with fibrotic cells, and again, this is a condition known as cirrhosis. And so we don't want that to happen because we need our livers. Again, go watch that talk, Love Your Liver, and it'll give you a lot more information on this. Okay, here are some more stones. These stones are very, very rich in toxins. So we don't want these things hanging around in our bodies. We need to get them out. And let me mention something here also. When we're talking about getting these stones out, when we do a liver flush, which we'll talk about in a different class, and right now I'm just trying to convince you that you need to do this. But when we do a liver flush, these stones have to migrate sometimes from deep within the liver. And so you're not going to move all those stones out with one liver flush. In fact, you may do your first liver flush and have nothing. That's actually fairly common because they have to migrate. And each flush that you do, they migrate closer to the bile duct and closer to being eliminated. And you can see in this picture, there's another factor that affects that. You'll notice this is the gallbladder here, this little, it looks like an octopus head hanging down. This little sac here full of stones is the gallbladder, and it sort of droops down. So you can see how when you do a liver flush, the gallbladder does contract, but it's kind of difficult for it to squeeze all those stones up and out that duct. And so it takes a little time. It takes a few of these flushes. I know people, and personally, I have done probably, I'd say at least a dozen liver flushes back to back. I do them every 2 to 3 weeks whenever I do a series, and I'm still passing stones at the end of that. Now, let me interject something here. I have had people tell me, that's not liver stones, that's not gallstones, that's just the oil that you drank that's, bound up with the bile. Hogwash. That is not the case. If that were true, then I would have these stones with every liver flush, but I don't. And why would that be if it's the olive oil? Well, also another thing is these stones have been studied in the lab, and they are not just olive oil. They are cholesterol stones, bilirubin, all these things, the different things that these stones are composed of. And there are different types of gallstones and liver stones. Here's another picture. As you can see, they can be different color, they can be different texture, they can be different sizes, and that's because of the different makeup. This is an actual picture of a gallbladder, a dissected gallbladder, and you can see there are hundreds of little tiny stones in this. There's bigger ones, these yellow things are stones, and then the smaller ones are smaller stones. Now, in the gallbladder, this is usually associated with some bile sludge. The bile becomes thick and sludgy. I talk about that in the Love Your Liver talk. We'll touch on that a little bit later in different classes. But just know that we need to keep our bile thin and moving, not thick and sludgy. Okay, bile in the intestines is vital, and the lack of it can be life-threatening. It is vital, as I mentioned earlier, for the absorption of fats and fat-soluble vitamins. Think vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin A. All these are fat-soluble vitamins. If you don't have enough bile, it's going to be difficult to absorb these vitamins. Blockages from gallstones can lead to life-threatening diseases such as heart disease, cancer, osteoporosis, and even hemorrhagic disease. And as we've discussed already in this talk, you can understand how all that backflow could easily cause hypertension, could easily cause heart issues, put extra pressure on the heart. Okay? Of course, poor absorption, as I mentioned, of vitamin D can hinder the immune system. I think we've heard a lot about vitamin D, the importance of it with the pandemic that we've been dealing with. Recent research also has shown that a lack of vitamin D contributes to colon cancer and DNA damage. Poor calcium absorption can lead, as we mentioned earlier, to osteoporosis as well as tooth problems. And I definitely had this when I was exposed to the mold and had Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tetanus and all these things within a 2-year time frame. It affected my gut absorption. I ended up with autoimmunity, and I started having all kinds of dental issues. I thought my teeth were going to fall out. Thankfully, I have kind of gotten a grip on that now, and I'm able to do some things to ameliorate that situation. Inadequate bile flow leaves food improperly digested, which can lead to putrefaction, and this is a good cause for harmful bacteria to be increased in the gut. And the byproducts of this putrefaction, as I mentioned earlier, are extremely toxic. And a constant exposure to these toxins can lead to IBS, Crohn's, constipation, diarrhea, diverticular diseases, ulcerative colitis, appendicitis, and much more. Symptoms that toxins are afflicting the intestines include, but are not limited to, the following: foul-smelling breath. I have actually worked with patients whose breath smelled like stool because they were so constipated. A coated tongue, headache, bloating, gas, joint pains, prostate enlargement. Female disorders, weight gain, acid reflux, sinus congestion, fatigue, poor memory and concentration, brain fog, insomnia, skin disorders such as eczema and psoriasis. Everyone who has eczema and psoriasis, in my opinion, has a liver issue. Premature aging, hormonal imbalances, and the list goes on. Proper posture is important for bowel elimination. We're going to get a little bit cozy here. We're going to talk about our bowel habits and actually the position that we take when we eliminate our stool. There's something called a squatty potty. I'll show you a picture of it in just a minute. The best position for bowel elimination is actually the squatting position. I have a friend who does not sit on the throne. He squats on it. He actually puts his feet up on the seat and squats on the toilet. My grandparents always had a footstool in the bathroom, and I have one in my bathroom, the wisdom of the elders. Okay, here, this actually talks about anatomically what happens. If you look here, you can see in this first picture there on the left, the puborectalis, I believe is, I don't have my glasses on, but I believe it's the puborectalis muscle. It actually squeezes off the lower part of the rectum there whenever you are in the sitting position. But when you're in a squatting position, that muscle is relaxed, so you can properly eliminate your stool. So you can see the problem with the standard sitting position for elimination. This is what the squatty potty looks like, and you can note the knees are up and elevated, and you're more in a squatting position with this. You don't have to spend a lot of money on this. You can just use a common house stool, or if you live in the country and you heat with wood, just go get a block of wood and put it in there. If your husband's a carpenter, have him build you one. That's what I did. A congested liver can obstruct venous flow back to the heart and cause palpitations and even heart attack. This congestion can lead, as I mentioned earlier, to hypertension. This is due to an improper breakdown of proteins, which causes the body to store excesses in the blood vessels, and the blood vessels actually become fragile. So the body then wants to add calcium to stabilize those blood vessels, and so they become hardened, and you end up with hardening of the arteries. Another thing that can contribute to this is vitamin C deficiency. This is why I am such a proponent of vitamin C intake and making sure that you have adequate vitamin C. Biliary congestion also leads to lymphatic congestion. When the lymph is not flowing well, the body cannot take out the trash. Every person with a large, anytime I see a man who's kind of thin and he's got this big belly down there, I know he has liver problems and he has lymphatic congestion. Okay? Lymph distension at the thoracic duct in what's called the cisterna chyli is what is the cause of that. This duct is located deep within the abdomen, just below the belly button. And if this area is plugged up, you're not draining about 85% of the lymph from your body on a daily basis. And if the lymph is backed up, it's because the liver is backed up. Harley disease can be named, that can't be traced in some way to lymph congestion, and again, lymph congestion is traceable to liver congestion. There is a direct connection also between low thyroid function and stones in the liver and gallbladder. We are told in the book Healthful Living, page 30, that perfect health depends on perfect circulation. And that's not just perfect circulation of the blood, it's circulation of the lymph, circulation of the bile. These things are very vital. So how do I fix this? I'm hoping that with this particular presentation, I've created within you a sense of need to take care of my liver. So what I recommend for people across the board is a parasite detox, liver flushes, and liver detoxification. So that's what we're going to talk about in this class, and here are the supplies that you will need to purchase as we move forward. Once you obtain these items, you can begin right away if you want to get the malic acid in a supplementation form, a capsule. I use Nature's Life, I think is the name of the brand. It's in a blue bottle with a yellow lid. I'll try to put a picture in of it. That needs to be a minimum of 10 days prior to any liver flush. Once you get it, you can go ahead and start taking it. It's also good to help with pain. If you have any kind of pain, malic acid is good for pain relief. The other things that you'll need to get are some food grade Epsom salt. Make sure that it says food grade on there, because some have additives like oils and fragrances and stuff like that. So you want one that's just plain old Epsom salt, food grade Epsom salt. You will need cold pressed organic extra virgin olive oil, fresh grapefruit, orange, or lemon juice. And we use, because you're going to have to drink this oil and juice mixture, and also the Epsom and water mixture, tastes nasty. So if you have some sort of a natural lozenge or something that you can suck on to kind of help take away that flavor, you don't have to do that, but that's something that because when I drink the oil, when I do the liver flush, and that's a discussion for a different class, a different section of this presentation, it makes me a little nauseous. And if I put either a kosher peppermint lozenge, I use ones from doTERRA. They have one called On Guard and one called Breathe lozenges, and those are very helpful to assuage that nausea. Okay, you will need Enema Supplies, an enema bucket. This is the kind I recommend here. In this slide you can see I like the stainless steel ones. That's a lifetime investment. That's a one-time investment. You may have to replace the tips or the tubing or something, but that bucket should last you forever unless you're just a gorilla. And then tangerine essential oil. The tangerine essential oil, I don't know what it is about it, but all of the citrus essential oils help to dilate the bile ducts, but none are as effective as tangerine essential oil. So you can put a drop or two of that in the enema. We'll talk about why and when to do the enema in a different class. Now the other thing here, which I overlooked, was either dandelion leaf. You can use it fresh. If it grows out in your yard, that's fine, collect that. Or you can buy dried dandelion leaf, or you can use organic coffee. The one that I recommend is S.A. Wilson's. Now let me just touch on this coffee enema a little bit. If you have, if your conscience bothers you to use this, and you don't want to put the coffee in your body, I have no problem with that. I have read a lot of research about the effectiveness of the coffee enema, and I have seen it be extremely effective. I have colleagues who are using dandelion leaf for the same liver cleansing purposes. I have not read any research on that. If you have some research, will you please send it to me? But I am fine with using that. I'm fine with even using just a hot water enema or a warm water enema with the tangerine essential oil in it. That's fine. I'll tell you later when and why you need to use that, but these are supplies that you will need to obtain. The supplies that you'll need for the Parasite Detox are Mimosa Pudica seed. I will put a link in the description below for where I use that. And disclosure, we are affiliates with Microbe Formulas. They have what I believe is the purest form of Mimosa Pudica seed that I've found on the market. A lot of other supplements for Mimosa Pudica, other distributors for that, I have found they use the stem, the leaf, the root, but that's not what you need. It's the seed that is so effective. And so Microbe Formulas uses just the seed, and it is extremely effective. I've never seen anything work as well for parasites as Mimosa Pudica seed. And then you'll need a tincture with at least 2 of the 3, if not all 3. I prefer all 3: wormwood, black walnut hull, and clove. So you'll need to obtain a tincture. Now, before we close this class, I want to give this disclaimer. Please, I'm going to have this slide here. You can read it, you can look at it as an additional caution. If you are on medications, statins, blood pressure medications, these types of things, consult with your physician before you do the liver flushing. I'm doing this to cover myself because there is potential that these drugs can be concentrated in the bile if you do the liver flush, and it can cause an issue. Or if you've taken chemotherapy within the last 6 months, you will need to wait until it's been 6 months. So that concludes our first portion of this particular series on how to care for the liver. And so we'll see you in the next class. Thank you for joining us.